Hey guys, tonight we tumble backward through time into a scene not quite as glamorous as the movies would have you believe. You're lying on damp, uneven ground, the mist still clinging to the edges of the field like a ghost that overslept. The grass is wet from morning dew, or maybe from yesterday's blood. In the distance, a rooster crows half-heartedly, possibly regretting his life choices, so, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. Are you winding down, or should you already be asleep? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. This is not a joust. There are no shining heroes or triumphant music swelling in the background. It's just you. Your armor stinks, your stomach's in knots, and the vague scent of horse manure really completes the ambience. You're about to participate in a medieval duel, and spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. You blink up at a gray sky, cold and unfeeling. The birds chirp merrily, which feels rude considering what's about to go down. The year is something like 1372, give or take a few centuries, and you've just been roused from your slumber by a grizzled-looking squire who smells like onions and regret. It's time, he says with a voice like gravel. Your boots are already on, though they're soaked. Everything's soaked. You slept in your armor last night, which sounds uncomfortable because it was. A solid breastplate might stop a sword, but it doesn't do much for lumbar support. Your ribs ache, your arms are sore, and you still have no idea whether the bishop agreed to bless your dagger. You rise, bones cracking, and look across the field to the other side. A crowd is starting to form, peasants, nobles, a few monks, and that one dog who somehow always finds its way into these events. There's no announcer, no flags waving, no cheerleaders. Just a deathly hush, broken only by the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith hammering something ominous in the distance. You're not here because you want to be. You're here because someone said you insulted Lord Gerard's wife, or maybe his sheep, it's honestly unclear. But this is how disputes are settled. Not with a court case or a sternly worded letter. No, no. With steel. With sweat. With an audience. Historians still argue whether duels were truly about justice or just a convenient excuse for upper-class blood sport. Your opponent hasn't arrived yet. Which is rude, frankly. You want to get this over with, preferably before lunch. A priest arrives instead, humming a prayer under his breath. He gestures vaguely at you, sprinkling holy water like he's seasoning a roast. You nod politely and try not to let it drip into your boots. A noble steps forward, a judge, of sorts. He'll declare the terms, which you definitely didn't read. Something about fighting until surrender, confession, or unconsciousness. Death is optional but statistically likely. You'd ask for a lawyer, but he's probably out farming or inventing penicillin or something. Then you see him. Your opponent. Across the field, waddling forward like a particularly aggressive turtle. He's got a dent in his helmet and a mustache that defies physics. You lock eyes, or at least you assume you do, through the tiny slit in his visor. This man thinks you wronged him. And maybe you did. Maybe you borrowed his ox and returned it with emotional damage. Or maybe this is just politics. Either way, you're both now legally entitled to try and murder each other in front of an enthusiastic audience and one extremely bored chicken. You try to calm your nerves. Take a breath. Shake out your arms. Your sword feels heavier today, or maybe it's the knowledge that one wrong move could end with your liver being donated to the soil. A squire adjusts your gauntlet and mutters, "Good luck," but it doesn't sound convincing. Here's a quirky tidbit. Did you know some combatants would wear charms or even stuff their armor with herbs for good luck? One guy allegedly tucked a hedgehog into his breastplate. Defensive strategy. Emotional support animal. Historians still debate that one. You walk to the center of the field. The crowd parts. It feels like stepping into a painting, except the colors are duller and everyone smells faintly of cabbage. You take your place, feet squared, heart pounding, the noble raises a hand. Fight with honor, he intones, like that's going to mean anything in 5 minutes. This is it. This is how disputes were resolved in the Middle Ages. You stand there, sword in hand, armor creaking, waiting for the signal. You'd like to say you feel brave, but honestly, your bladder disagrees, and in that brief pause before the fight begins, you wonder, did you remember to sharpen your blade? Did your squire tighten the straps properly? Did you just hear someone place a bet against you? The trumpet sounds, a real one, not metaphorical. It's time, you raise your sword. The crowd holds its breath. The duel is about to begin. And you, poor soul, are stuck in the middle of this ancient game where pride, land, justice, and the occasional sheep all ride on a single moment of impact. The trumpet's echo fades into the morning fog, and the silence that follows is somehow louder than the blast itself. You shift your weight slightly, the mud squishing under your foot, the tip of your sword glinting under the gray sky. Across from you, your opponent rolls his shoulders like he's loosening up for a friendly game of lawn bowling, not a legally sanctioned brawl to the near death. This is the part where you choose your weapon. Except you already did. Or your lord did. Or the bailiff. It's complicated. In some duels, you actually got to agree on terms with your opponent, like civilized lunatics. Other times, the judge assigned the weapons, because nothing says impartiality like letting a guy with gout decide if you'll die by sword or axe. You glance down at what you've been given. A long sword. Solid choice. Versatile, sharpish, and only slightly rusty. But in the chaos of medieval dueling, it's not always your best friend. That's why, on the ground nearby, your squire has also placed a small collection of Plan BS. There's a mace that looks like it was stolen from a church gargoyle. A warhammer that would probably qualify as home decor in some Viking households. And then, oddly, a shovel. Just a plain wooden-handled shovel. You point at it with a raised eyebrow. Your squire shrugs. You never know. He's not wrong. Weapons in medieval duels weren't always standardized. Sure, swords were the gentleman's go-to, but depending on social rank, local customs, and the judge's hangover, you might end up using clubs, staves, daggers, or even agricultural tools. Historians still argue whether one 14th century German duel actually featured a contestant using a flail designed for threshing wheat. We may never know if it was symbolic or just poorly planned. You flex your fingers inside your gauntlets. Leather squeaks. The hilt of the sword feels familiar but uncooperative, like a pet cat that only sits in your lap when it feels like it. You take a test swing, slow, controlled, mostly to show the crowd that, yes, you are marginally prepared to commit violence. Your opponent lifts a battle axe, the blade nicked and worn, the shaft dark with age and, you imagine, a fair bit of old blood. His hands are massive. So are his eyebrows. You realize he is holding it one-handed while waving to someone in the crowd with the other. You are deeply offended by this display of casual multitasking. A nearby monk mumbles something about divine judgment and fate. You're not entirely sure whether it's a blessing or a warning. The noble raises his arm again, and this time it drops. That's the signal. You both lurch forward. It's not a sprint, it's more of a lopsided shuffle, like two armored penguins trying to fight for dominance in a very loud, very public zoo. You swing your sword wide, testing the distance. He parries with the flat of his axe, and for a brief moment, sparks fly, not cinematic, golden sparks, but a quick, gritty flash that smells faintly of metal and dirt. Again. Swing. Block. Step. Mud. Breathing harder already, the first few seconds of a duel are like the first awkward moves of a middle school dance, hesitant, unsure. Full of second guessing. You're not just trying to hit each other. You're watching posture, grip, footwork. You're looking for that single moment of imbalance. Because all it takes is one, and you're sweating already. By the way, have you ever tried swinging a full-length sword while wrapped in 60 pounds of armor and a chainmail shirt that feels like damp spaghetti? It's not elegant. Your shoulders protest. Your back makes an ominous noise. Still, you press forward. He slashes diagonally, fast, stronger than you expect, and it bites across your chest plate with a hollow metallic scream. You stagger but hold, you retaliate, stepping inside his reach and bringing your pommel up toward his helmet. The clang resonates like a broken bell. He reels back slightly, grunting, and you feel a brief flicker of satisfaction. This isn't fencing. This isn't a duel with precise technique and artistic footwork. This is brutal, dirty, animalistic combat wrapped in the illusion of chivalry. Here's a quirky tidbit: some duels were fought in confined spaces like pits, or even on planks over water. One bizarre tradition had combatants fight naked while smeared in grease. It was slippery justice. Historians still debate whether these were actual trials or just extremely violent dares gone too far. Back to you, your opponent swings low. You barely sidestep, sword grazing his shoulder in the process. He grunts again. This time it sounds less confident, the crowd roars, or groans, it's hard to tell. But you hear laughter from somewhere in the noble seats. Great. Your comic relief, you try a feint, raise the sword, drop it suddenly, and lunge with your shoulder. It works, sort of. You knock him backward, but now you're off balance too. Both of you stumble, armor clanking, swords catching in cloaks and straps. You reset. Breathe. Mud clings to your knees. Blood trickles from somewhere under your collar. Could be yours, could be his. You're honestly too tired to investigate. You remember that story the blacksmith told about the duel in 1415 where one guy won by sitting on the other until he passed out. At the time, you laughed. Now, it sounds like a decent plan. You both hesitate. Circling, your sword's heavier now. His axe swings lower. Both of you are calculating the odds. How long can this go on? Are you willing to die for this? Is he? Suddenly, he rushes. You block, twist, elbow, duck. A flurry of motion. Your helmet shifts, the strap cutting into your cheekbone. His axe nicks your thigh, pain blooms, sharp and hot, and you retaliate with an upward slash that glances off his gauntlet. The duel, barely minutes old, has already begun to take its toll. There is no referee here. No timeout. No applause for good sportsmanship. Only you, your opponent, and the mutual understanding that this must end with someone on the ground. You pull back, panting. Sweat drips into your eyes. You smell metal, horse, and something else, fear, probably. The shovel still lies on the edge of the field. It's looking more appealing by the minute. Your legs are shaking. Not from pain, well, not just from pain, but from the sheer weight of everything. The armor, the adrenaline, the knowledge that one misstep could leave you flopping like a fish in front of a bunch of bored peasants. And now, as you both circle each other again, there's a pause. An unspoken agreement: we're tired. Let's pretend we're strategizing, but this is medieval Europe, and you can't just call it off. There are rituals to follow. The crowd didn't ride 2 hours in a cart over pothole-strewn goat tracks to watch you exchange polite nods and hydration tips. They want a show. The nobles want justice. The church wants divine judgment. You want a sandwich. Before the next clash, your mind drifts, probably from mild blood loss, to the odd rituals that came before this duel. Because nothing says justice system like a goose sacrifice and a muddy field. Earlier that morning, before dawn, there was a small procession. You stood awkwardly in a makeshift tent as a monk sprinkled more holy water than strictly necessary on your forehead. Your blade, and your boots, which you suspect was just to mess with you. A few psalms were chanted. The priest gave a sermon about divine judgment. You caught none of it. Your thoughts were busy elsewhere, mostly stuck on, what if I trip and land sword first into my own foot? Some duels required oaths before the fight. You had to swear you were telling the truth. That you were innocent. That your opponent was a liar, a cheat, and probably had lice. You even swore you didn't bribe anyone, which, ironically, was often said after bribing someone. Historians still argue whether these rituals were sincere religious acts or more theatrical than spiritual. Either way, they were an essential part of the performance. Because make no mistake, this was theater. Justice as spectacle. Your life, on display. Then there's the ordeal. Not your ordeal, that's happening now. We're talking about a legal practice called trial by ordeal. It was the predecessor of duels and possibly the reason your village has a suspicious shortage of unburned hands, one popular version. The accused had to carry a red-hot iron a set distance. If their wound healed cleanly after a few days, they were innocent. If not, well, clearly guilty. Another classic, being thrown into water. Float. Guilty. Sink. Innocent and possibly drowned. In retrospect, dueling seems almost rational by comparison. You remember being asked to touch the Bible before the duel. Not in reverence, more like to swear that you wouldn't cheat. You resisted the urge to cross your fingers inside your gauntlet. Back in the present moment, your opponent coughs loudly. It echoes through the field like a bear clearing its throat. Maybe he swallowed a bug. Maybe he's just as done with this as you are. He shifts his grip on the axe and mutters something under his breath. You can't quite hear it, but it sounds like chicken stew. It might be a threat. It might be his dinner plans. You raise your sword again, only now noticing the small painted emblem near the crossguard. A lion, poorly drawn. Maybe added by your squire for luck. Or boredom, you lunge, half-heartedly, more of a test than a real attack, and he responds with a step back and a raised eyebrow. This is starting to feel less like combat and more like a very intense disagreement over who should do the dishes. Still, the duel has to move forward. The judge, seated in a fancy wooden chair under a sunshade, because of course he has a sunshade, leans forward expectantly. His wine cup is nearly empty. He probably wants a conclusion before lunch. The crowd, too, is getting restless. Some cheer. Others boo. One child holds up a small sign that just says bonk. You try not to feel personally insulted. You take another step forward. This time, you swing from the right, low and quick. He blocks with the haft of his axe, but you feel the vibration shoot up your arm. He counters with a jab of his shoulder, unexpected, and it slams into your chest plate hard enough to send you stumbling. You drop to one knee. A gasp ripples through the audience. You're not badly hurt, more surprised than anything, but the optics are bad. Kneeling looks suspiciously like losing. Your squire gasps. You can hear it. So can the dog. You rise, slowly. There's no time out in trial by combat. You don't get to adjust your armor or call in a sub. You push through the pain, grip your sword tighter, and give your opponent a look that says, "Try that again and I'll throw the shovel." He raises an eyebrow. Maybe he speaks shovel. You both square off again. There's a beat of quiet. It's during these silences that you remember all the things you forgot to do this morning, like eat. Or write your will. Or tell your mother you loved her. Not because you're feeling dramatic, but because statistically, this fight shouldn't end well for someone. And you're currently the one holding the sword like it's a reluctant cucumber. Oh, and did you know? Some duels required the combatants to follow bizarre symbolic gestures before the fight. Like tossing a glove, or striking the opponent gently to initiate the combat. There was one case where a man challenged another by throwing a bloody gauntlet into a stew. Yes. A stew. Historians still argue whether it was an insult, a culinary complaint, or both. You take another swing. He blocks it, but you follow with a pommel strike to the helmet. It lands with a satisfying clang, and he staggers. For once, you have the upper hand, you press the advantage. A flurry of swings, heavy and desperate. He manages to block most, but not all. One grazes his shoulder. One slams into his thigh. He grunts in pain. Now you're both panting. You're both bleeding. And it's still anyone's guess who's winning. Then something strange happens. He lowers his axe, just a fraction, a pause, you hesitate, enough? He rasps, you blink. Was that a truce offer? The crowd doesn't cheer. They murmur. They've seen this before. Sometimes, fighters reach a point of exhaustion, or clarity, or mutual suffering, where they realize continuing would just mean more pain with no better outcome. Sometimes they agree to a draw. Or someone confesses. Or one collapses, you don't answer. Not yet. You raise your sword again. Not to swing. Just to decide, because in this moment, muddy, bloody, and breathless, you realize this duel isn't just about pride, or land, or sheep. It's about survival. And whether it ends with honor, surrender, or a mutual grunt of exhaustion, it will end, soon. You lower your sword, not all the way, just enough to catch your breath and let your arms rest for a precious few seconds. Your opponent does the same. The field is silent again, save for the occasional sniffle from someone in the front row and the distant clang of the smith still hammering away, possibly on your future coffin fittings. This is the perfect moment to reflect on something deeply inconvenient. Your armor is killing you. Not in the poetic sense. Literally. The weight, the heat, the constriction, it's a miracle you're still standing, because here's the thing about medieval armor, it wasn't made for comfort. It was made to turn you into a walking metal pantry with hinges. And while yes, it does offer a solid defense against blades and arrows, it also offers a solid invitation for joint pain, chafing, and fainting spells. Let's start with what you're actually wearing. Over a linen undershirt and a padded gambeson, think of it as the world's heaviest quilted bathrobe, you've got a full hauberk of chainmail. That's tens of thousands of interlocking rings that jingle every time you move. You are a one-man percussion section, on top of that, your plate armor. Chest, shoulders, arms, thighs, greaves, gauntlets, and, of course, your helmet, the lovely, vision-obstructing, ear-muffling helmet. You can barely hear yourself breathe. Your neck aches from the weight. You're sweating in places you didn't know could sweat. It's like exercising inside a metal bakery, and while it's true that armor was often custom-fitted to its wearer, you are not a noble. You're wearing something borrowed. Let's call it vintage. Let's also call it 2 sizes too tight across the ribs. Historians still debate how agile knights really were in full armor. Some say it was surprisingly mobile, you could run, mount a horse, even cartwheel if you were drunk enough. Others argue that it turned you into a clunky kitchen cabinet with legs. The truth is probably somewhere in between. Right now, you feel like a meat pie inside a steel lunchbox. Your gauntlets are the worst. They make gripping your sword an exercise in frustration. You dropped your weapon once earlier during training because you sneezed. Your squire still won't let it go, you shift your footing again, the knee plate catching slightly. That's the thing with armor, every piece is secured by straps, cords, or buckles. If one shifts, the rest follows. If 2 shift, you're going to trip and die, and speaking of dying, your helmet fogs up every few breaths. Visibility is a cruel joke. You keep blinking, trying to focus through the narrow slit. Light shifts. Shadows move. You hope that's your opponent and not your squire sneaking snacks again. A fun fact, knights would sometimes line the insides of their helmets with wool or leather for cushioning, and occasionally, herbs or dried flowers to cover the stink. Because yes, it stinks in here. Armor gets reused, often unwashed. The smell of sweat, rust, and dried blood lingers. And if someone vomited in it during a previous duel? Well, best not to think about that. Your armor is also loud. Every movement produces a low clatter, a soft metallic chorus of creaks and scrapes. You are not sneaking up on anyone. In fact, you suspect that flock of birds that just flew away several yards behind you heard you thinking about moving. Your opponent, equally encumbered, shifts as well. His helmet has a small dent in the side, likely from your earlier pommel strike. He raises his axe again, this time more out of habit than aggression. You mirror the motion, another clash. Another grunt. Another second closer to either victory or a pulled hamstring. You wonder, briefly, about the poor blacksmith who had to forge all this gear. It took days, sometimes weeks, to shape each plate, each rivet. Hundreds of hours to make you look like a glorified mailbox. And here you are, trying not to collapse into a puddle of armor and despair. Here's something curious, did you know some knights painted designs or slogans onto their armor? Not just coats of arms, but phrases. One particularly spicy noble once scrawled "Come at me" in Latin across his greaves. Another reportedly had a rose painted near his armpit. Whether that was for luck or irony remains unclear. Your armor, however, bears no such flair. Just rust and a faint squire-sized handprint where he pushed you into it this morning. Now, back to your current suffering. The duel drags on. Each movement feels heavier. You try to shift your breathing, but the helmet restricts airflow. Your arms are slower. The sword feels less like a weapon and more like a shovel made of guilt. Your opponent falters, tripping slightly in the mud. You press forward, but your boot catches on something, possibly a small rock, possibly the edge of your dignity, and you both nearly fall. From the sidelines, someone groans. Probably your mother. You reset again. Breathing heavily now. You try to roll your shoulders, but the pauldrons clank like angry dinner plates. You attempt a small hop in place to test your legs. Bad idea. Both knees protest. Loudly, another swing. Another parry, and all the while, your armor reminds you of its presence. The backplate digs into your spine. The gorget, your neck guard, rubs uncomfortably against your jawline. Your left pauldron keeps sliding down. You are literally falling apart. You suddenly remember a story about a knight who loosened one arm strap for better movement and ended up with a dislocated elbow after swinging too hard. Historians still debate whether he was brave or just poorly buckled. You're beginning to understand. Your helmet, too, is shifting. It's supposed to be secured with leather ties, but one feels loose. Every time you duck or tilt your head, the whole thing wobbles slightly. The last thing you want is to look like a bobblehead during your own near-death experience. And then, clang. A blow lands on your back. Not hard, but enough to make your spine light up like a cathedral chandelier. You stagger forward and turn with a roar, sword raised, teeth bared. Your opponent hesitates. It's not fear. It's fatigue. You both know it. This duel won't be won by skill. Not anymore. It will be won by endurance. By whoever can stay upright the longest inside their own personal torture chamber of steel. Somewhere behind you, someone sneezes. You both pause. It's ridiculous, this whole thing. And yet, you straighten up, raise your weapon again, and press on, because honor demands it. Or so they say, because justice is watching. Supposedly, but mostly because the noble hasn't stood up yet, and until he does, this ridiculous, heavy, clanking, sweat-drenched dance must continue. You've reached the point in the duel where the crowd starts to whisper, not from excitement, but concern. The kind of murmurs people make when watching a slow cart accident and wondering whether to intervene or just let nature take its course. You and your opponent are barely moving now, not because you've come to some mutual respect, but because both of you are moments away from collapsing under the combined weight of armor, fatigue, and profoundly poor life choices. You try to keep your grip firm on your sword, but your fingers have gone numb. Your palms feel like raw dough, squished inside sweaty leather gloves. Your arms tremble every time you raise the blade, and you're pretty sure your left knee has made a formal request to retire. That's when you really get a good look at your opponent. He's breathing heavily, hunched over, his axe dragging in the mud. His breastplate is dented and stained, and his helmet is cocked at a slight, almost comical angle, like a tipsy tin soldier at a holiday party. He looks as miserable as you feel. Maybe even more, and yet, here he is. Just like you. Still standing. Still swinging. Still trying to pretend that this isn't the worst Tuesday of either of your lives. You're not enemies. Not really. You probably wouldn't even notice each other in the market. But now, because of honor or law or a sheep-related insult no one quite remembers, you're locked in a spectacle of pain. Here's something that might comfort you. Some medieval duels weren't to the death. First blood, until surrender, until one man couldn't stand, those were all acceptable endings, depending on the country, the court, and the patience of the audience. But even those less-than-lethal options could go horribly wrong. After all, you're swinging heavy, pointy things. It doesn't take much for first blood to become last breath. Historians still debate how often duels were truly fatal. Some argue most combatants survived, albeit with broken ribs and wounded pride. Others believe deaths were common, especially when the crowd demanded entertainment. The truth probably lies in the middle. Some survived, some didn't, and all regretted it. Your opponent coughs. A real, full-bodied, dusty-throated cough that echoes inside his helmet. You're not sure if it's a threat or just respiratory distress. He lowers his weapon for a moment and mutters something. You lean in slightly, confused. What? You wheeze. Your sword's chipped, he says. You blink. That's what he wanted to tell you. You glance down. He's right. Near the edge, a small chunk of metal is missing. You don't know when it happened, maybe during that parry against his axe, or maybe earlier, when you tripped over your own sense of pride. Thanks, you mutter, genuinely. He nods. Then tries to swing at your head again. It's not personal. It's procedure. Your blade clangs against his, and you both groan, not from fear, but from the joint pain of middle-aged reenactors at a Renaissance fair. You feel your calf cramp and your shoulder protest with an audible pop. He stumbles backward, muttering something about his hip. You remember something your squire said yesterday, something dumb, like this'll be over quick. You'd like to travel back in time just to scowl at him. You swing again. He blocks, but barely. You lunge, overextend, and now you're both pressed close, awkwardly chest to chest like two reluctant dancers. There's a moment of bizarre intimacy as your helmet knocks against his. Nice weather, he mutters. You huff. Shut up. You break apart, almost tripping, and circle each other again. The crowd is still there. Still watching. But the energy has shifted. They're no longer cheering, they're wincing. One child covers her eyes. Someone else starts a slow clap and is immediately shushed. This duel is not the elegant clash of knights in a poem. This is two exhausted men trying not to pass out while occasionally threatening each other with iron, and honestly, it's kind of beautiful. You were told your opponent was cruel. That he insulted your honor. That he spread lies. That he deserved punishment. Now you see a man just like you. Tired. Hurting. Trapped in a ritual he didn't design. You wonder, briefly, what he does when he's not dueling. Maybe he's a baker. Or a tailor. Or a man with a terrible singing voice who still insists on leading tavern songs. and maybe that's the cruelest part of all this. You'll never know. Because here, on this muddy field, you're both just combatants. Instruments of judgment. Pawns in someone else's game, you both lunge again, this time slower, more cautious. The blades meet. Sparks fly, small ones, not the dramatic kind. The impact sends another jolt through your arms, he trips. Falls to one knee, you hesitate, this is it, right? You should strike. That's what the crowd expects. That's what the judge expects. That's what the system demands, but something in you stops, you lower your blade. Just a little, your opponent looks up, surprised. Then he laughs. A low, wheezing, painful laugh that sounds more like a cough. You're soft, he says, you snort. You're welcome. You offer your hand. He stares at it, the crowd begins to murmur again. This time louder. Disapproving, you look at the judge, he frowns, no verdict. Someone calls out, what about justice? Says another, you and your opponent ignore them. You're tired. You're hurting. And suddenly, justice feels like a very expensive way to justify needless pain. Then the judge stands, everyone goes quiet, he clears his throat. Takes a long look at the two of you. Says something short, clipped, continue. And just like that, the moment of peace dies, you sigh, your opponent groans, you pick up your sword again, because in the end, it's not your choice. This is more than you. This is tradition. Law. Performance, and justice, it seems, requires a few more bruises. You drag your sword through the mud as you square up again, silently mourning the last bit of mercy you tried to show. Across from you, your opponent grunts and rises to his feet, groaning like a barn door in winter. Your eyes meet. There's a flicker of mutual irritation. Not at each other, at the judge, the crowd, the whole inflexible system that's demanding you keep going like a pair of blood-soaked wind-up toys. You both raise your weapons. Slowly. Grudgingly, this time, neither of you lunges right away. You both know how this game is played now. This isn't about justice anymore. It's about not getting killed before supper, but just for the sake of mental stimulation, and to distract yourself from the slowly forming blister beneath your right heel. You try to remember what the actual rules of trial by combat were. You vaguely recall hearing about them back when someone first suggested this as a solution. Spoiler alert, there weren't many. And even the few that did exist were as loose as a tooth in a tavern brawl. Officially, trial by combat was supposed to follow legal procedures. There were written customs in some parts of Europe, especially the Holy Roman Empire and England, that tried to bring some order to the chaos. But let's be honest, half the time, it depended on the mood of the judge, the rank of the fighters, and whether or not anyone had a grudge that day, the basic premise. Two combatants fight, usually with weapons of their choosing. Or those imposed by a court. The duel continues until one party is dead, yields, or is too injured to fight. Then God, in theory, reveals who was in the right by letting the righteous man win. Historians still argue whether people truly believed in divine judgment through combat or if it was just a convenient excuse to settle feuds without involving complicated paperwork. It probably started with faith, then evolved into legalized gladiator cosplay. There were also rules about who could duel. Nobles, landowners, and knights. Sure. Commoners. Sometimes. Women. Rare, but surprisingly yes, in a very specific and deeply awkward format we'll talk about later. Some duels even required formal announcements. Like, hear ye, I accuse Lord Buckethead of treachery and thievery most foul. And then you'd throw down a glove, or a gauntlet, and the accused could accept or forfeit. It was equal parts legal hearing and low-budget soap opera, but even if there were formal codes of conduct, they weren't exactly enforced mid-fight. You were supposed to keep things honorable. No magic. No poison. No sneak attacks. But plenty of duels ended with a knee to the groin or a fistful of sand to the eyes. Because once the blood starts flowing, the rules become more. Guidelines. Case in point, your opponent fakes a lunge, then kicks you square in the shin, you yelp, he shrugs. Instinct. You grimace and retaliate with a shoulder bash that sends him stumbling backward. Honor, right? One strange duel from the 14th century involved two knights who agreed not to aim for each other's faces, until one of them accidentally broke that rule with a mace. He won, but also lost 3 teeth to karma. Back on the field, the judge clears his throat again. This time, his voice rings out, "Let no man interfere. Let the righteous be revealed." You resist the urge to sigh. If righteousness could be revealed through stubbed toes and pulled muscles, you'd already have sainthood. Still, the duel must go on. You grip your sword tighter, pivot left, and attempt a swing with all the enthusiasm of someone lifting a wet mattress. Your opponent blocks, not cleanly, but enough, and counters with a clumsy chop at your thigh. It glances off your armor, jolting your leg but not breaking the skin. You're both gasping now. Your breath rasps through your helmet in hot, stale bursts. You try to blink away the sweat dripping into your eyes, but it's no use. Visibility has been reduced to "I hope that's a tree and not a knight with a club." At this point, the rules of the duel feel more like suggestions written on a napkin and thrown into a fireplace. You slip slightly on the mud. He trips over your scabbard. For a moment, you're both off balance, flailing like drunks at a wedding. The crowd isn't sure whether to cheer or offer medical attention. Still, you both recover and regroup. Somehow, it's around now that you start to appreciate just how absurd the entire system is. Trial by combat was based on the belief that God would always ensure the righteous would win. But, really? What if the righteous guy had asthma? Or skipped breakfast? Or tripped on a pine cone? There's even one recorded case where a man clearly won the duel, clean blow, opponent down, and then died of his wounds 3 days later. So, was he right? Wrong? Half right? Historians still debate whether divine judgment had an expiration date, and let's not forget the loopholes. Some accused parties could decline a duel, especially clergy, elderly men, or those with royal protection. Sometimes you could even hire a champion to fight on your behalf. That's right. You could outsource your duel. Just picture it. "Yes, I'm innocent. Please contact Steve. He's got good footwork and his own mace." You didn't get a champion. You are the champion. Which, frankly, feels like a cruel administrative error. The sun has crept higher now. Your back is soaked with sweat. The mud has dried into hard clumps on your greaves. Every breath is a wheeze. Every blink takes conscious effort, but the duel hasn't ended. The crowd is quieter now, their anticipation worn down by repetition. The judge drinks from his goblet. The priest scratches his beard. The local dog is now asleep near the shovel. You are the only two people still pretending this is a good idea. Your opponent lunges. You parry. The blades clash, scrape, slip, and then he stops. He's frozen, shoulders heaving, arms trembling. You realize something's wrong. He steps back. Lowers his axe. "I yield," he says. At first, you don't believe it. You wait for a trick. A hidden blade. A sucker punch, but no, he drops the weapon, falls to one knee, hands raised. The crowd gasps. You don't move. You don't celebrate. You don't even exhale. You wait, then the judge stands again, his voice surprisingly steady for someone who's been sitting the whole time. The victor is named. The duel is concluded. The priest mutters something Latin sounding, a bell rings once, and just like that, it's over. No fireworks. No cheers. Just aching silence and the lingering smell of sweat, iron, and wet grass, you blink. Try to straighten your back. Regret that instantly, you won, apparently. You stand there, sword drooping at your side, armor hanging off your aching frame like a half-collapsed tent, and realize something mildly terrifying: you don't feel victorious. You feel like you've aged 6 years in half an hour and are one slightly uneven cobblestone away from crumpling into a groaning pile of night-shaped regret. Across from you, your opponent is still kneeling, head bowed, hands limp. He's not bleeding badly, just bruised, battered, and exhausted. Same as you. A few attendants shuffle forward, not rushing exactly, more like cautiously poking a beehive. They lift him up gently and guide him toward the shade, and that's when you notice it: the judge hasn't left. In fact, no one really has. The crowd remains seated. Silent, you glance around, confused. You were expecting applause. Or a dismissal. Or, at the very least, a meat pie tossed in appreciation. Instead, the noble judge raises one gloved hand and declares, "Now, the sentence shall be passed." You stiffen. Wait, what? Because here's the kicker about trial by combat: winning the fight doesn't mean your day is over. There's still the small matter of consequences. See, technically, the duel was just part of the legal process. A tool to determine guilt or innocence. But it didn't automatically reset your reputation or restore your lands or make you best friends with the guy you nearly decapitated. And depending on where in medieval Europe you were, the fallout could be complicated. In some cases, a victor would be granted titles, land, or compensation. In others, he'd be praised publicly but punished privately for, say, wounding a noble, or for not killing the other guy. The logic was, if you were truly in the right, shouldn't divine justice have delivered a more thorough victory? Historians still argue whether combat was seen as genuine divine judgment or just a good enough solution when the courts couldn't figure out whose cow was whose. In your case, you listen warily as the judge begins to speak. He declares that your claim, that you were falsely accused of trespassing and theft, has been proven just. That the gods, and gravity, have favored you. That the duel has concluded honorably. Then he adds, almost as an afterthought, however, the matter of damages to Sir Wulfric's fields remains unresolved. You blink, Sir Wulfric. That's your opponent's name. Honestly, he looks more like a Grog or a Kevin. The judge continues, explaining that while you've proven your innocence regarding theft, you're still expected to negotiate restitution for the damage your goats allegedly caused. You almost laugh. You did just fight a legally sanctioned death match over goats. Now you're being fined for lawn care. Welcome to medieval justice. You step back from the field, limping slightly, and collapse onto a wooden bench near your squire. He offers you a skin of lukewarm water and a piece of cheese that's clearly been in his pocket all morning. You eat it anyway. Victory has lowered your standards. He beams at you. You did it. You nod slowly, chewing. Did I? He frowns. Well. You're not dead. That's something. You glance toward your opponent. He's now sipping wine under a linen canopy, attended to by what looks like a particularly judgmental nun. He sees you looking and raises his cup faintly, a gesture somewhere between toast and truce. You raise your cheese in return. Here's a strange little fact: in some regions, it was customary for opponents who survived a duel to shake hands, dine together, or even exchange gifts. Not out of friendship, but to close the spiritual and legal loop. Because according to certain beliefs, a duel left a kind of metaphysical residue that had to be ritually cleaned up. One tale tells of a German trial where the winner helped bandage his opponent's wounds, then bought him a drink. The two became business partners. Whether this is true or just folklore designed to give medieval HR departments something hopeful to cite is still debated by scholars. You're not feeling particularly spiritual at the moment. Just tired. But something strange does stir in your chest, something that feels an awful lot like empathy. You and Sir Wulfric didn't want to do this. Neither of you woke up craving a duel. But the law pushed you both into it. You were tools. Instruments. Actors in a script you didn't write, and now the curtain has fallen, and the audience has started to drift away. The judge packs up. The priest gathers his things. The crowd files out, some chatting, others quiet. A few glance back at you with respectful nods. One child mimics your earlier swing and nearly falls over, and just like that, the spectacle ends. No parade. No feast. Just sore limbs and administrative follow-up. You stand slowly. Every joint pops. Your squire hurries to help you unbuckle the straps of your armor. Piece by piece, it falls away, the gauntlets, the greaves, the chest plate. You feel lighter, exposed, incredibly itchy. There's a mark on your arm where a strap rubbed raw. You'll be feeling that for a week. You going to keep the sword? Your squire asks. You glance at it. Muddy, chipped, slightly bent. You nod. Might use it for firewood. He laughs. That's the spirit. The two of you gather your things and begin the slow walk back toward the stables. There's no music, no banners, just the sound of wind through dry grass and your own aching footsteps. But as you near the edge of the field, you stop. Sir Wulfric is there. He offers a slight bow. You fought well. You return the gesture. You kicked me. He smiles. Only a little. There's a pause, then he adds, if you ever need a second in a land dispute. Send word. You raise an eyebrow. You offering to duel my neighbor? I'm offering to lend you the shovel, he says. You both chuckle, softly, carefully, because neither of you is sure you won't cough up a lung. You part ways without fanfare. You don't know if you'll see him again. Maybe. Maybe not, but for now, the duel is done. You're alive. Mostly upright. And only mildly concussed, and honestly, that's a win. The next morning greets you like a drunk uncle, loud, unforgiving, and completely unaware of your physical limitations. You wake up feeling like someone stuffed your joints with gravel and dipped your muscles in vinegar. Your back aches. Your arms ache. Even your eyelids seem to have pulled something. You sit up slowly, creaking like an old ship, and take inventory. All limbs accounted for, no fresh wounds, one particularly dramatic bruise on your hip shaped like a turnip. You sigh. Another normal day in the aftermath of legalized assault. Your squire enters, carrying a wooden basin of water and a cloth that's somehow both too cold and too rough. You've got visitors, he says, like that's a completely reasonable thing to say to someone who just participated in a medieval lawsuit with swords. You groan. Tell them I'm dead. I did, he replies. They said they'll wait. You groan again, louder this time. Eventually, curiosity wins. You throw on your tunic, every movement accompanied by a wince, and shuffle toward the courtyard. To your surprise, it's not the judge. Or a tax collector. Or someone with more goats. It's a group of local villagers, some familiar faces, others new. One of them hands you a basket of bread and herbs. Another offers a warm smile and says, "We saw what you did." "Thank you." You blink. For what? For not killing him, she says, as if that's the sort of thing one thanks people for regularly. You want to protest. You didn't intend mercy. You were just tired, confused, and accidentally moral. But you nod anyway. As the crowd disperses, a tall, sunburnt man lingers. He's holding a rolled parchment. "You've been summoned," he says, as cheerfully as one can when delivering official paperwork. "Summoned for what?" You ask, suspicious. "Royal audience. They want to hear about the duel." "Who's they?" He grins. "The ones who wear crowns and make other people duel on their behalf." You sigh. Deeply. Like a man watching his vacation burn in slow motion. because this is another part of the medieval world no one warns you about. Word gets around fast. And nothing spreads faster than a public display of almost death between two sweaty men in armor. Duels weren't just about justice. They were entertainment, gossip fuel, political leverage. A particularly dramatic duel could earn you fame, infamy, or, in rare cases, a job offer. You recall stories of knights who made a name for themselves by surviving outrageous duels. Some were offered land. Others, royal appointments. One guy got a chicken farm and an honorary title that translated to Lord of Left-Handed Justice. Historians still debate if the title was real or the result of one very elaborate joke. You agree to go, mostly because saying no to the crown tends to shorten your life expectancy. The journey takes several days. Your body protests with every bump in the road, every uneven step, every awkward silence shared with your squire who insists on singing local ballads off-key. When you arrive, the castle looms like a stone mother-in-law, imposing, judgmental, and far too interested in your business. You're brought into a small chamber, modest by royal standards, still grander than anything you've seen. Rich tapestries hang on the walls, depicting battles that probably didn't happen that way. A bored herald reads your name aloud like he's reciting the ingredients on a sack of oats. Then, finally, the nobles enter, the prince. Two dukes. A woman in blue who might be a countess or just very rich. They sit across from you like curious owls in expensive feathers. They ask questions, not about justice, not about the law, about the fight. What move did you use? Did the axe make a sound? What were you thinking when he hit your shoulder? Were there sparks? Was it true someone fainted in the audience? You answer, because what else can you do? You describe the hits, the slips, the grunts, the shovel. You skip over the more humiliating moments, like when your gauntlet got stuck on your belt and you nearly punched yourself. They listen with rapt attention. At one point, the countess leans forward and whispers, "Was it terrifying?" You nod. More than anything. And she smiles. Good. This is how you learn another uncomfortable truth. For the ruling class, duels aren't just about honor. They're spectacle. A way to reinforce power. Remind people that justice, real or symbolic, comes from the top down. Your duel is now a story. A cautionary tale. Maybe even a legend in the making. They thank you. Offer you a small pouch of silver coins and a decorative brooch shaped like a sword. You leave the castle richer, but with a strange weight in your stomach, because you know what really happened. Two tired men, trapped by tradition, trying not to fall over in the mud. Back home, the story's already grown. Children reenact the duel with sticks. The local baker sells victory loaves. Your squire starts referring to you as the Shovel Knight. You wish you could laugh. Maybe one day. For now, you sit by the fire and poke at the scar forming near your collarbone. You think of Sir Wulfric. Wonder how he's healing. Whether he tells the story the same way. You still feel like you lost something. Maybe trust. Maybe a little of your soul, but in exchange, you gain something else, clarity. You understand the world a little better now, the way power masks itself in ceremony, the way violence gets polished into legend, the way justice wears a different face depending on who's watching, and maybe, just maybe, next time someone demands satisfaction, you'll offer tea instead of steel, or at least ask to borrow someone else's armor. It's been a few weeks since the duel, and life has finally begun to return to something resembling normalcy, though your definition of normal now includes phantom aches, unwanted stares at the market, and the occasional child yelling "whack him again" when they recognize you. Apparently, your duel has become local theater. You're back on your land, or what's left of it. A few fences need mending. The goat that started this whole saga looks smug as ever, chewing grass and contemplating her next legal crisis. You eye her warily. She burps. Your squire has taken to referring to himself as the assistant to the victor of the third duel of spring. You've stopped correcting him. Let him have his moment. He did, after all, help peel your armor off without commenting on the smell, much, and just when you think you're safe, settled, maybe even uninteresting again, a messenger arrives, new parchment. New wax seal. New headache, this one comes from the town council of a nearby city. It's phrased very politely. You are cordially invited, read, expected, to attend an exhibition duel for educational and civic enrichment. The event, they note, will be accompanied by musicians, refreshments, and minimal risk of injury. You stare at the paper for a long moment before muttering, define minimal, because here's the thing, your victory has made you popular. Not in a roses on your doorstep kind of way. More in the you're now a symbol of justice and entertainment kind of way. And medieval society loved a good symbol. Historians still debate whether public duels like these were meant to inspire civic pride or distract people from crumbling roads and rising bread prices. The reality? A little of both. A well-timed duel could rally public morale or cover up a botched tax collection, and so, you saddle up once more. This time, you're not riding to defend your name. You're riding to demonstrate it. A performance. A pageant. You're not even expected to win or lose. Just to show up, swing a sword convincingly, and not maim the other guy too badly. That guy, it turns out, is a miller named Thomas who once broke his foot kicking a bucket. He's friendly. Talks a lot. Very excited to be part of the show. He's never held a real sword before but assures you he's got the spirit. You wonder if spirit can deflect steel. The crowd is enormous. Townsfolk, merchants, traveling nobles, and a man in a chicken mask who refuses to explain himself. They cheer as you enter the arena, really just a cleared field with a few benches and far too much embroidery. A herald announces your name with great flourish. He adds a few titles you definitely didn't earn, like Defender of the Innocent and the Iron Warden. You decide not to argue. The embroidery alone has probably raised expectations beyond repair. Then it begins, not with a duel. With a dance, that's right. The exhibition opens with a choreographed reenactment of your trial by combat, performed by two actors who look nothing like you or Sir Wulfric. One has a beard made of straw. The other has clearly never held a sword upright. It's absurd. It's hilarious. The crowd loves it, then they call for the real combatants. That's your cue, you step forward, armor polished, sword dulled for safety. Limbs still creaky from the last encounter. Thomas, bless his heart, looks like a potato wrapped in chainmail. He waves to the crowd like he's at a wedding. The fight is. Well, it's not a fight, it's a dance. A routine. Swing, block, step back. Pretend, stumble. Cheer. Repeat, it's all carefully rehearsed chaos, like watching two cows try ballet. You manage to make it look convincing without drawing blood, though Thomas accidentally knees you once and apologizes for a solid minute while the crowd roars with laughter. It ends with you raising your sword in mock triumph, and the audience chanting your new name, apparently, Sir Shovelstrike. You sigh. It could have been worse. After the show, the mayor offers you cider and a pouch of coins. Children ask to touch your gauntlets. One woman insists you sign her wooden ladle. You oblige, and just when you think you can slip away, the town clerk hands you a scroll, another invitation, he says, smiling far too brightly, to next month. A peace demonstration. You'll love it. Minimal risk. You close your eyes. The problem with surviving a duel is that people assume you want to do it again, but deep down, something odd stirs. You're tired. Yes. Sore. A little embarrassed by all the fuss. And yet, there's a flicker of pride. Not in the violence. Not in the mud and bruises, in the witnessing, in knowing people saw someone choose not to kill, because maybe that's the part they remember. Not the swordplay. Not the final blow, the moment where you could have ended it, and didn't. Maybe that's the part that mattered. You ride home beneath a pink sky, thinking of turnip-shaped bruises and straw beards and Sir Wulfric's crooked smile. You pass a field of geese, who hiss as usual, and a child holding a wooden sword who yells, "For honor." You wave, and for the first time since your duel, you smile, not because you're a hero, but because maybe, in some ridiculous, muddy, sword-swinging way, you're a story worth telling. There's something peculiar about becoming a local legend. You go from that farmer with the goats to Sir So-and-so, defender of the realm practically overnight, and not because you suddenly grew taller or wiser, but because people need stories. And now, lucky you, you're one. You try to go about your life as usual. Fix the fence. Feed the animals. Avoid conversations with particularly nosy neighbors. But your days are no longer your own. There are invitations. Requests. One man even sends a tapestry of your duel, though for some reason it depicts you holding two swords and breathing fire. Artistic license, your squire says with a shrug. You stare at the dragon in the background. I don't remember that part. He nods solemnly. It was symbolic. The tapestry now hangs crookedly in your main room. You've tried taking it down twice, but both times someone from the village showed up for a viewing, so it stays, for now, and just as you settle into this new phase of reluctant semi-fame, another summons arrives. This time from the church, not a complaint. Not a punishment. A request. Apparently, they're organizing a lecture. An educational panel on divine judgment and moral fortitude. And they want you to speak. As a guest of honor. Alongside a bishop, a scholar, and a monk who reportedly once debated a tree, you consider declining. Strongly. Then they mention pastries. So here you are, in a modest cathedral hall that smells faintly of incense and overly polished pews, standing next to a monk who introduces himself as Brother Ulrich the Humble and then proceeds to talk for 45 minutes without pause. Your role is to share what it felt like, being in a trial by combat. Facing judgment not just from men, but from the heavens, and for the first time, you're unsure what to say. Because the truth is, during the duel, you weren't thinking about God. Or righteousness. You were thinking about not tripping over your own feet. About how heavy your sword was. About whether or not your opponent had eaten breakfast, but you can't say that. Not in a church. Not with Brother Ulrich staring at you like you're about to deliver holy truth, so you speak carefully. You describe the silence before the first strike. The weight, not just of the blade, but of the decision to use it. The moment of hesitation. The moment of mercy. You end with a simple sentence, "I hoped I wasn't wrong." The room is silent for a beat too long. Then the bishop nods. The scholar scribbles furiously. Brother Ulrich mutters something about divine restraint. You're handed a small medal and a loaf of bread and gently escorted outside. Your squire meets you on the steps, holding a pigeon. "They gave me this," he says. "For assisting." You stare at the bird. "Why is it wearing a cape?" "It's symbolic," he says again. You walk home quietly that evening, bread under your arm, pigeon fluttering along behind like a feathered sidekick. The sky is bruised pink and lavender, and somewhere a lute plays a song you almost recognize. It's peaceful, in that heavy, end-of-day way. You start to think, again, about meaning. See, duels weren't just legal tools. They were rituals. Ceremonies. Strange hybrids of justice, theater, and superstition. And people interpreted them however they needed. Historians still argue whether most duelists saw themselves as vessels of truth or just desperate men trying not to die. Some records suggest participants fasted and prayed for days beforehand. Others imply they drank heavily and insulted each other's mothers until someone gave them a sword. One chronicler tells of a man who, before a duel, spent hours drawing symbols on his shield to channel angelic strength. He was defeated in under 2 minutes and later became a monk. You wonder which path you'd have taken had you lost, probably not monastic life. You like your goats too much. And monks frown on sarcastic thoughts, which you have in abundance. Back home, your door creaks open and you're greeted by the smell of herbs and damp wood. You toss the bread onto the table, hang your cloak, and sink into the chair by the hearth, and as the fire crackles, you realize something strange. The duel changed you, not in the way people say. You don't feel nobler, or braver, or chosen. But you feel sharper. Not just in mind, but in the ability to see through things. The layers. The stories we tell, like how your opponent wasn't evil, just trapped, or how the judge wasn't wise, just following precedent, or how justice, real justice, is often a complicated, muddy, painful thing that looks very little like the songs. You shift in your chair, stretching your legs, still sore but healing. Then there's a knock, your squire opens it, and you hear him say, "He's here, but don't expect him to duel again." A man steps inside. Older. Weathered. Not armed, he bows. "My lord," he says, "I've come seeking advice." You blink. "From me?" He nods. "I'm to defend my honor next week. The court has approved combat. But I've never lifted a blade." You sigh. "Here we go again." You motion for him to sit. You pour 2 cups of cider. You glance at your sword, resting near the hearth. Quiet for now, and you begin to speak, not about glory, or righteousness, or divine favor, but about balance. About fear. About the ache in your shoulders that still hasn't quite gone away, because now, apparently, you're a mentor, and while you never meant to become a symbol, you might as well be a useful one. The man you're mentoring, his name is Adric, by the way, has the same hollow eyes you did a few weeks ago. That look of someone who's just realized the only way out is through, and through involves a lot of bruises and perhaps a tooth or 2 left behind in the dirt. You remember the feeling too well. He grips his practice sword like it might explode. His stances are all wrong. He swings like he's trying to swat a wasp with a bench. "Loosen your shoulders," you tell him. "You're not lifting a cow." He frowns, adjusts, and promptly trips over his own boots. It's going to be a long morning. Training someone for a duel isn't like teaching a craft. There's no long arc of mastery. You're preparing someone to survive, not to win medals. You focus on footwork, on timing, on recognizing when to stop swinging so you don't fall flat on your face. The basics. Because let's face it, Adric's not going to become a swordmaster in 4 days. But he might, with luck, avoid skewering himself. He asks questions. Not the smart ones, either. What if I throw sand in his face? Would a war cry help? Can I bring a small dog for emotional support? You answer as best you can, no, probably not. Only if it bites ankles. Still, he improves. Marginally. He stops tripping by the end of day 2. On day 3, he lands a weak but well-aimed tap on your shoulder and beams like he's won a tournament. You try not to roll your eyes much, but what surprises you is the talk between drills. The quieter parts. He confides that his opponent is a cousin. That the whole dispute started over land boundaries after a heavy rain, and now, somehow, it's escalated to court-sanctioned bludgeoning. You sigh. Because that's so typical. You tell him how duels were often less about justice and more about settling things. Publicly. Cleanly. Symbolically. Sometimes, the courts used them to avoid lengthy trials. Sometimes nobles encouraged them to reinforce their authority. See how we allow you to seek justice, even if it's just a mud wrestling match with knives. Historians still argue whether these rituals truly prevented worse violence or simply repackaged it in a way people could stomach. Maybe both. Maybe neither. You remember a tale from Burgundy. A miller accused a noble steward of sabotage. The steward accepted the challenge. The miller trained for weeks. On the day of the duel, he was so nervous he forgot to wear pants under his armor. He won anyway. Adric listens, wide-eyed. Then he mutters, "I hope I remember my pants." By day 4, you take him to the field. Not the official one, just an open patch of grass behind the granary. You mark boundaries with sticks. You walk him through the steps. The bow. The raise. The strike. You even show him how to fall properly, because you will fall, you say. And getting up gracefully is a skill. He nods solemnly. The day of his duel arrives, crisp and gray. Not stormy, not sunny. Just middling enough to make you squint and feel mildly inconvenienced. The crowd is smaller than yours was. Just villagers, court scribes, and a judge who looks more interested in lunch than justice. The opponent, Adric's cousin, is built like a stack of firewood and wears armor that looks newer than his conscience. Adric steps forward. He looks terrified. You give him one last nod. "Don't panic," you say. "And remember, if it gets bad, you can always yield. There's no shame in staying alive." He nods. "Thank you." Then he turns, takes position, and the duel begins. It's not elegant, it's not fast, it's exactly what it should be. Two scared men trading slow, clumsy blows while trying not to vomit. You watch with a growing sense of pride. Not because he's winning, he's not. But because he's doing it. Holding his ground. Blocking. Breathing. Surviving. At one point, the cousin lunges, slips, and falls flat on his face. The audience gasps. Adric has a chance to strike, but he pauses. Waits. Lets his cousin get up. The judge notices. You see it in his eyes. The same choice you made. And then, a moment later, Adric loses his footing and yields. The duel ends. No victor declared. No punishment assigned. The judge calls it a draw. The scribes grumble. The cousins, bruised but breathing, shake hands, and you exhale for the first time in what feels like hours. Adric walks over. Bleeding slightly from the elbow. "That," he says, "was awful." You clap him on the back. That means you did it right. Later, back home, he says something that stays with you. "I thought I was proving I was right. But really, I just wanted someone to see that I tried." You nod. Because that's the part they never tell you. Duels were never just about verdicts, they were about visibility. About saying, "I mattered enough to fight for. I stood in front of the world, and I was seen." Even if it hurts, even if you lose, especially then, that night, you sit by the hearth again. Your sword leans against the wall. The pigeon has learned to fetch, sort of. Your squire is humming tunelessly and burning soup. Everything feels strangely steady, and as you stare into the fire, you think, this is what justice could be, not blades. Not bruises. Not blood in the mud, but the effort, the choice, the refusal to be erased. The days blur after Adric's duel. Word spreads, of course. It always does. But this time, something's different. People don't just whisper about the fight, they talk about the pause. About the moment he held back. The cousins stumble. The raised sword that never fell, and suddenly, everywhere you go, people are asking about mercy. Did it happen in your duel too? Was there a moment when you could have ended it and didn't? What would have happened if you had? You give the same shrug every time. Mercy's not in the rules. But it's always in the room. That becomes your phrase, accidentally. You hear someone repeat it in the market like it's a proverb. A potter carves it into a jug. Your squire tries to stitch it on a banner before giving up halfway through the word room. But in truth, you're not trying to start a movement. You're just reflecting, because now that you're not actively ducking swords, you have time to think about all the duels you didn't fight. The ones you barely remember seeing but that stayed with you anyway. You remember a baker's apprentice who refused to duel a knight, saying, "If God wants to punish me, let him do it without swords." He was fined, not flogged. The knight eventually forgot the offense. Years later, the apprentice built a bakery across from the barracks and became rich selling meat pies to squires. You remember a woman in the village who, when accused of poisoning her neighbor's chickens, was given the choice, duel or ordeal. She chose neither. Instead, she spoke for 2 hours straight in front of the judge, reciting every detail of her herb gathering and chicken feeding routine until the entire court fell asleep. When they woke, they declared her innocent. Possibly out of exhaustion, historians still argue whether these cases were rare acts of defiance or quiet signs of changing times. But you think it's simpler than that. Sometimes, people just didn't want to fight, and when given even the smallest opening, they didn't. It's strange, isn't it? How much ceremony goes into violence. How deeply humans crave structure, even when hurting each other. The duel isn't chaos, it's planned. Timed. Watched. You suppose that's what makes it bearable. The illusion of control. Of fairness. One morning, a merchant visits you. He's from a nearby city, one of the places where dueling is still fashionable. He's older, round in the way that suggests a successful life and generous meals, and he carries himself like a man used to being agreed with. He wants to sponsor a new kind of duel, he says. One where the combatants use blunted weapons, wear thick padding, and compete not for justice but for points. Spectacle. He calls it sport. You raise an eyebrow. Isn't that what wrestling's for? He waves dismissively. Wrestling's sweaty. This has rules. Judges. Strategy. You take a sip of cider and pretend to consider it. In truth, it's not the worst idea you've heard. In some parts of medieval Europe, trial by combat slowly evolved into something closer to tournament duels, ritualized contests with heralds, armor, and cheering crowds but without the legal consequences. A place to show skill without shedding much blood. A middle ground between justice and performance. Historians still debate whether this shift was out of enlightenment or exhaustion. Whether people were growing more humane or simply more bored. Either way, the tide was turning. You tell the merchant you'll think about it. Later that night, your squire asks what you really think of the idea. You poke the fire and say, "Well, I'd rather swing at someone in a game than to decide whether they deserve to die." He nods. Still hurts either way, though. You smile. Not if you aim low. The next day, a letter arrives. It's written in elegant, slightly smug handwriting and bears the seal of a nearby noble house. Apparently, a land dispute has arisen between two minor lords. The court has proposed a duel to resolve it. But, and this is the interesting part, they want you to act as an advisor, not a fighter, not a judge, a consultant. You chuckle. Only in the medieval world would a former duelist be promoted to bureaucracy. You accept. More out of curiosity than duty, at the hearing, you sit on a bench between two men who clearly hate each other but are far too well dressed to say so out loud. Their dispute boils down to a missing stream. Literally. A stream that shifted course over the years and now flows more on one side than the other. They want justice, they want fairness, they want, of all things, a fight, but after hours of arguing and sighing and listening to them shout about fish, you offer an alternative. Build a wall, you say. Split the stream. They stare. You'd rather swing axes? You ask. Over a puddle? There's a long silence, then one of them mutters, "Fine." And just like that, a duel is averted. You walk home feeling strangely satisfied. Not because you changed the system. Not because you prevented bloodshed, but because, for once, words won, and in this world, that's rare enough to celebrate. You wake one morning to birdsong and the distant creak of wagon wheels. For once, it's quiet. No messengers. No invitations. No people wanting your opinion on sword etiquette or where a stream spiritually belongs. You stretch, roll your shoulder, still stiff, but less so, and decide that today, perhaps, will be a normal day, and then your squire trips over the doorway holding a rolled scroll, breathing heavily. So much for that, urgent, he wheezes. From the capital. You blink. That's not usually a good thing. You take the scroll. The wax is gold. The seal shows a rearing stag, a royal crest. You sit down, breathe, unroll, apparently, a member of the royal family, some distant cousin of the king or perhaps a second-removed Baron Duke of an unpronounceable hamlet. Has found himself in a rather sticky inheritance quarrel. 2 claimants. 1 estate. No clear will, the proposed solution, a ceremonial trial by combat, of course, and who better to oversee such a thing than someone who's lived it, survived it, and now waxes philosophical about it, you, they're offering gold. A guest room in the palace. And, this is in bold, minimal personal involvement required. You sigh. I've heard that before. Still, you accept, because you know what happens if someone like you doesn't show up. Someone less careful does. Someone who sees dueling not as a last resort, but as a shortcut. A spectacle. A ladder, the journey to the capital takes nearly a week. You travel with an escort this time, not for protection, but ceremony. Flags. Trumpets. One guy who insists on announcing your name at every village square like you're a baked good on sale. When you arrive, the city unfurls before you like a tapestry, white stone, crowded streets, towers that pierce the sky, and a smell that's somewhere between spiced apples and wet horses. You're given rooms near the inner court. Clean linens. A balcony. A bath. Your squire nearly cries. The duel, you learn, is scheduled for the solstice. In the royal arena, with thousands expected to attend, and yes, it's real. The swords are real. The grievance is real. The blood will be real. You meet the combatants. One is a young noblewoman named Alice, sharp-eyed and wiry. The other is her cousin, Lord Henrik, wide-shouldered and quiet, who carries his family crest like it's a personal burden. They both want the same thing, a crumbling estate with moderate income, a vineyard, and a title that no longer means much, but represents everything. You ask if they've considered mediation. Alice rolls her eyes. Henrik just shrugs. No, of course not. That wouldn't be dramatic. They're polite. Educated. Practiced. And entirely convinced that this duel will solve something. You spend the next few days observing. Offering advice. Adjusting rules. Making sure the referees know what counts as a win, what constitutes yielding, and what happens if someone faints in the sun. You also write a clause. If either combatant yields, they may share ownership under the terms of reconciliation. Land divided, title suspended, no vengeance allowed. The court raises eyebrows. But they accept it. Because by now, your reputation carries just enough weight to nudge the legal scale. The day arrives. The arena is a circular marvel of stone and banners. People crowd the benches, nobles, commoners, merchants, foreign dignitaries. All here to watch 2 cousins fight over a vineyard. You sit in the central box, not far from the royal dais. The king isn't here, just some lesser lords and a very bored falconer. The announcer calls names, the crowd roars, the cousins take their places, and then, silence. The duel begins. It's fast. Brutal. Neither is pretending. This is real steel, real sweat, real bruises. Alice lands the first hit, a glancing cut across Henrik's arm. He grunts but presses forward. He counters with a shoulder shove that knocks her to one knee. The crowd loves it. you don't. Because you can already see it, the part where this doesn't end cleanly. Where pride refuses to yield. Where blood proves nothing, and then, it happens, Alice slips. Her sword tumbles from her hand, Henrik raises his, time slows, you see it in his eyes, the moment of decision, and he stops, he lets his sword fall, he steps back, I yield, he says, voice steady, gasps. Cheers. Confusion, you rise, this duel ends in shared claim, you declare. Both parties live. No vengeance. The land will be governed together. The title retired. A few old lords mutter. But the crowd? The crowd stands and claps, because even they know, this was better. Later, you speak to Henrik. Why? You ask. You could have won. He shrugs. I didn't want to inherit a vineyard soaked in family blood. You nod, good answer, back in your chambers, your squire is polishing your boots for some reason, you're becoming something, he says. What, a dusty old man who gets invited to duels like weddings? No, he replies. Something better. You smile faintly, but you know the truth, you're still just a man who once didn't die when he was supposed to. And now you get to make sure other people don't die when they don't have to, and in this world, that's enough. The applause still echoes faintly in your ears by the time you leave the capital. Not loud anymore, not overwhelming. Just a soft memory that clings to your cloak like wood smoke, you don't ride out with a fanfare or a feast. Just you, your squire, a slightly battered mule with digestive problems, and a cart full of thank-you bread from noble kitchens who weren't sure what else to send. You're glad for the quiet, the road winds through green hills, speckled with early wildflowers and the occasional cow that looks more judgmental than necessary. You pass inns where travelers nod respectfully. You pass villages where children still swing sticks and call each other Lord Henrik and Lady Alice. You stop once at a blacksmith's, where someone recognizes you and offers free horseshoes, in honor of not letting cousins stab each other to death. You're not quite sure what to say. So you say thank you. Somewhere near the third village, a clerk from a regional court flags you down. Breathless. Dusty. Eyes wide with admiration. You tense, another summons, no. Not this time, he's here to ask how did you stop the duel from becoming another bloody pageant? How did you write that clause? Would you be willing to help draft guidelines for future ceremonial combat events? You blink, you want policies? Yes, he says, like it's a prayer. Something we can point to. Something to prevent these things from spiraling. You never thought you'd see the day, so you sit at the next inn, in a back corner with a lukewarm mug of ale, and start writing, trial by combat, revised protocols for arbitration and alternative outcomes. It sounds terribly boring. It is terribly boring. But it might just work. You add a footnote about geese, for no particular reason, it feels right. Because here's the thing, while most people remember duels for the clang of steel and the dirt-stained glory, what they need is the part that comes after. The parchment. The compromise. The boring bits that keep swords sheathed. Historians still argue whether the gradual phasing out of judicial combat was a product of enlightenment or just rising insurance premiums. You lean toward the latter. But the shift was real. Slowly, as society began to lean into evidence, testimony, and negotiation, the spectacle faded, and what remained, paperwork. Negotiation. Words, you keep writing. You keep thinking, you begin drafting scenarios. What if the accused cannot lift a sword? What if both parties agree on the facts but not the punishment? What if the weapon of choice is a shovel again? And how do we not let that happen twice? Your squire, reading over your shoulder, snorts, you're putting yourself out of a job. You shrug. That's the dream. The clerk returns with a larger group, scribes, minor officials, a woman from the merchant guild who offers to fund printed copies. Soon you're holding not just one scroll, but a guidebook. It even has a cover, Reason Before Reckoning, a gentleperson's guide to conflict resolution. You try not to gag at the title. But you smile anyway, because somehow, you've become the bridge. Between then and now. Between the old ways and something maybe better. Weeks later, back home, a messenger arrives, not with a duel notice. With a questionnaire. It seems some towns are experimenting with non-lethal justice festivals, and they want your input on the rules for symbolic combat using padded reeds. There's even talk of judges wearing capes for drama, not intimidation. You laugh. Actually laugh, the kind that starts in your chest and climbs all the way out. Your goats startle. Your squire drops a loaf of bread. You're laughing because it's ridiculous, and beautiful, and progress. One afternoon, you visit Sir Wulfric. He's healing. Slower than you. But steady. He lives in a modest home near a monastery now. Spends his days tending to herbs and teaching boys how not to hold a sword by the blade. He greets you with a nod and a raised eyebrow. Come to settle the score. You snort. I brought cider, not steel. You sit in the garden. Share stories. Talk about mercy. He's heard about Henrik and Alice. About the guidebook. About your quote becoming a local proverb. He says, you know, we might have ended up legends. You nod. Or cautionary tales. He grins. Same thing, really. You part with a firm handshake and a lighter heart. That night, as you sit beside your hearth, your squire reading aloud from your own guidebook with all the gravitas of a royal bard. You realize something unexpected. You're content, not because the world is fixed, not because no one will ever duel again, but because, if even one person chooses parchment over pain, that's enough. You close your eyes, you listen to the crackle of fire, the soft clink of a teacup, the steady breathing of someone who once thought violence was the only answer, and for the first time in a long while, you sleep easy. The rain arrives softly that morning, slipping through the canopy like a whisper too shy to speak aloud. It patters against the roof with no urgency, weaving a gentle rhythm across the quiet village. You stand in your doorway, wrapped snugly in your oldest cloak, the one that smells faintly of pine and old fires, its fabric worn smooth at the seams. The air is cool against your face, the kind of cool that brushes the skin rather than bites it. You watch as the rain falls in steady lines, stitching tiny rivers through the packed earth and around the worn stones that line the path to your home. There is no one on the road today. No scroll-bearing riders galloping up from distant cities. No stern-faced strangers in heavy armor seeking justice or retribution or answers to wounds they never quite learned how to heal. No messengers with trembling hands, no shouting from the square. Just the soft hush of water meeting soil. Just the stillness of a world allowed, for once, to simply be wet. You breathe it in deeply. The scent of damp moss rises from the earth, mingling with the faint trace of wood smoke drifting from nearby chimneys. Somewhere behind you, your hearth still glows faintly, and from it comes that ever-present smell of iron and leather. Your old sword rests nearby, exactly where it has stayed for weeks now. Unused. Unpolished. Still, your squire steps up behind you. Stretching and yawning, his hair wild from sleep. In his hands, he holds two mismatched mugs filled with steaming cider, the kind with too much spice but just enough comfort. He glances at the rain and then at you. Is it finally over? He asks, voice still heavy with the remnants of sleep. You accept a mug, warming your fingers against it, and after a pause, you say, maybe. You take a slow sip, watching the steam rise. Or maybe it's just the intermission. Because that's the truth, isn't it? Not everything ends with a final word or a closed book. Sometimes, it only pauses. Dueling may be drifting into history, its rituals growing dusty and its champions growing older. But human nature, stubborn as it is, never truly fades. It clings. It adapts. It waits. Someone will be wronged again. Someone will feel backed into a corner, burned by betrayal or shame or pride. Someone will look at the trembling scales of justice and feel them tip unfairly. In that moment, they may reach for something sharp. But perhaps, just perhaps, they will pause. Only briefly. And in that small, trembling pause, they may remember. They may recall a moment, a tale. A name. They may think of the vineyard cousins who stepped away from tradition. They may dust off that guidebook sitting idle in a town hall's cabinet and wonder if there is another way. Maybe that is enough. Those are the moments that stay with you now. Not the clang of the sword. Not the ache in your ribs. Not the cheering or the gasps. But that single heartbeat before it all. That fragile breath. The instant when a person is still undecided, still hovering between destruction and restraint. The quiet space where choice lives. The following weeks settle into a rhythm that feels oddly familiar. You return to your old habits, to the life you once led. You farm, though your back protests more than it used to. You mend torn fabric with fingers that remember how to hold a needle. You drink tea brewed by your neighbor who insists, loudly and without doubt, that dried leeks can cure anything from heartbreak to headaches. The tea is terrible. But you drink it anyway, because it comes with stories and laughter and something that feels like belonging. Then, one afternoon, a knock comes at your door. Not hurried. Not heavy. Just a knock. You open it to find a young woman standing there, travel-worn but bright-eyed. Her accent marks her as someone not from this village. Possibly not even from this country. She carries no scrolls, no weapons, no demands. Only a notebook, bound in leather and heavy with rain. I've been studying trials by combat, she says, voice tinged with nerves and curiosity. And I was hoping to hear your story. Not the one they tell in taverns. Yours. You step aside and invite her in. The conversation unfolds slowly. She sits at your table, scribbling notes between questions. She pauses often, chewing her lip. Tilting her head. Her questions are not what you expect. Some are simple. Others are strange. Did you ever want to kill him? She asks at one point, and the room goes quiet. What did the crowd sound like, really? She asks at another. If he hadn't yielded, would you have regretted what came next? Some questions press down on your chest, heavy and sharp. But you answer them all. Not because you enjoy revisiting those memories, but because you understand the weight of stories told wrongly. If someone is going to share this story, let it be the truth. Or as close to it as memory allows. You tell her about the stiffness in your shoulder, the way the joints ached the next morning. You describe the metallic sound of gauntlets meeting, the way the air smelled of dirt, sweat, and fear. You describe the precise moment your blade came down, and the exact second when you held it back. She listens without judgment. She writes with care. Later, she asks to see the sword. You show it to her. She holds it gingerly, eyes wide, studying the worn handle and the chipped edge. She treats it like something sacred. You know, she says thoughtfully, a century ago, they'd have enshrined this. Put it behind glass. Built a shrine around it. You smile faintly. Now it holds the window open when the latch won't catch. She laughs, bright and surprised, and you join her. And in that laughter, there is something light. Something clean, maybe that is better. As she gathers her things to leave, she turns to you one last time. I want people to understand, she says, not just what happened, but what it meant. You nod slowly. Then remind them of the choice. She writes that down too. Then, with a final smile, she steps back into the rain and disappears into the gray. you stand in the doorway a while longer, letting your thoughts drift. You think again of the strange beginnings. A goat, a broken fence, a misunderstanding that spiraled into something far greater than it should have been. A judge unable to see beyond precedent. And how that clumsy, painful spark became the fire that lit everything else, your duel. Your mercy. The discussions that followed. The ripples that still move quietly outward. It started small. Perhaps all real things do, historians still debate the significance. Some argue your duel was a turning point in local justice. Others call it an oddity, a curious tale with an unusually poetic ending. They file it away beneath footnotes and theories. But you know the truth, it was never really about law, it was not about fame either, it was about a single moment. A single breath. A person who could have continued down a well-worn road paved with centuries of violence and decided not to. That is what people remember, that is what endures, the refusal to destroy when destruction was the easier choice. That evening, as you sit down to dinner, your squire sets 2 steaming bowls of stew on the table. The aroma is strong, but familiar. He grins as he places a cracked loaf of bread between you. You know, he says, you could take up teaching full-time. Charge a few silver coins per lesson. Maybe toss in a demonstration with blunted swords. It could be a decent business. You laugh, the sound warm in your chest. You mean turn violence into a cottage industry? He grins wider. Isn't that what sports are? You shake your head, still smiling. Let's wait until my shoulder stops clicking every time I stir the soup. The stew is too salty. The bread is tougher than it should be. The roof leaks whenever the wind shifts from the north. But none of that matters, because this is home, and tonight, it is quiet, and tonight, no one needs saving. The seasons continue to turn, wheeling onward with their quiet insistence, never asking permission, never slowing for anyone. You watch the trees shift their attire from summer's green to autumn's gold, and then finally to a deep, rustling brown that crunches beneath your boots with every step. The wind becomes sharper, carrying the scent of wood smoke and something older, something ancient. The air itself feels thinner, colder, touched by the edge of winter's breath. One morning, you wake to find the first frost coating the fields outside your window, delicate and glistening, like the land is dusted with fine silver powder. It sparkles in the early light before melting into memory. Your sword is still there, resting exactly where you placed it. You pass it sometimes and run your hand along its worn grip. It does not speak. It does not move. But it watches, quietly, like a sentinel marking the boundary between who you were and who you are now. Its presence is no longer a call to arms, but a reminder of something once necessary and now, perhaps, finally laid to rest. The village around you has changed, subtly but surely. The sharp-edged tension that once hung in the air has softened. The stories told at night near the fire have shifted. There are no longer whispers about legendary duels or bloodshed beneath the moon. Instead, there are quiet tales of people finding new ways to resolve old grievances. Neighbors now gather to speak their minds rather than draw their blades. Disputes are settled with documents and dialogue. Justice is served with ink and a steady handshake, not with blood and bruises. Sometimes, without meaning to, you find yourself walking the old training ground. The path is still there if you know where to look, though nature has reclaimed much of it. Wildflowers bloom where footprints once marked stances. The soft moss has crept in along the edges. The wooden stakes that once defined the boundaries of sparring matches have long since rotted and fallen, their outlines barely visible beneath the soil. The circle where you once stood firm, sword raised and heartbeat quick, is now just earth. Just memory. You pause there. Let your fingers drift through the tall grass, feel the dew clinging to each blade. The sun is low on the horizon, casting a golden glow that makes everything seem like it belongs to another world. In the distance, a child shrieks with joy, chasing a dog across a patch of open ground, waving a stick like a sword. The dog, delighted, runs faster, its tail sweeping wildly. You watch them, unseen, smiling softly. This, you realize, is what progress looks like. Not a thunderclap. Not a monument. Not a banner waving triumphantly in the wind. But something gentler. Something slower. It looks like laughter echoing through the morning fog. It looks like hands reaching across divides. It looks like a child playing in a field where once blades met in anger. Progress is not always loud. Often, it is quiet and almost invisible, like roots growing beneath the ground, wrapping around stone. Holding the earth together, you think back to everything that brought you here. The weight of the choices you made. The fear that pressed into your lungs. The mercy you struggled to give. The moments when your path seemed shrouded in doubt, when the right thing was not the easy thing. You remember the uncertainty that clung to every breath, like mist that refused to lift. And yet, one step at a time, it did. Scholars and historians will always debate what trial by combat truly meant. Some will argue it was justice cloaked in brutality. Others will say it was ceremony disguised as righteousness. There will be those who call it cruel and those who call it necessary. But you know better. You understand that it was never a simple tradition. It was a mirror, held up to the hearts of all who stood in the circle. It reflected fear, pride, desperation, hope, and the deep human hunger to believe that truth could be proven with steel. And now, as the sun dips below the hills and night curls around the edges of the sky, you sit by the hearth. The fire crackles softly, its warmth seeping into your bones. Your squire sits beside you, no longer a child, but still looking to you for some unspoken wisdom. You do not speak much. There is no need. The silence between you is comfortable. Familiar, the world beyond the window is still, painted in shades of blue and silver. The stars begin to blink awake, one by one, watching from above as they always have. You lean back in your chair. Your eyes grow heavier with each passing moment. The fire's glow wraps around you like a blanket, and for the first time in a long while, you feel the weight inside you ease. Your shoulders soften. Your breathing slows. This may be the end of the story, but it is not the end of the journey. Every ending is simply a doorway to something else. Every step you took brought you here, and here will carry you further still. The world keeps moving. The choices keep coming. But tonight, peace is enough. And peace is real. Not less than war. Not weaker. Just quieter. Just steadier. You close your eyes, you draw in one last deep breath, and then, you let it go, you allow sleep to find you. The fire crackles one final time, then softens to embers. The whisper of night presses gently against your skin, cool and calm. The noise of the day fades behind you, replaced by a silence that does not frighten. It welcomes. It soothes. You are safe here. There are no more battles waiting on the horizon. There is no more judgment to fear, only the gentle rhythm of your own breath, steady and true. Let it wash over you. Let it ease your thoughts. Let it guide you gently into rest. Tomorrow will arrive as it always does, bringing its questions and its choices, but not yet. For now, you can rest. You have done enough. You have been enough. Good night.